You've been growing seedlings in some small pots and it's time to put them into a bigger pot. Maybe you have a house plant that's outgrown its pot and you need to go to a larger one. Or in my case, I have this Streptocarpus seedling here. And it's getting really crowded in the pot. It needs to be potted on. But which size of pot should I use? Should I go with one that's just slightly larger? Or one that's very large? What is the right pot size to use? The answer is going to surprise many of you. I'm going to have a look at what most gardeners provide as common sense advice. Then I'll look at the science. And finally, I'll give you some of my recommendations for which pot to use. What is the common gardening advice on this topic? Well, the advice online is almost unanimous. You should pot on using a pot that is one size larger or 1 or 2 inches bigger. If you're growing seedlings, you should move them from a small pot to a medium-sized pot. And then in a few weeks, move them to a larger one before they go outside. Same goes for houseplant cuttings. Always start in a small pot and move up slowly as the cutting grows. Here are some explanations as to why it's important not to move up to a larger pot. A smaller amount of soil dries out more quickly and allows more oxygen to reach the roots, which they need to survive. But just a minute, our potting mix and seedling mix already has lots of air in them. Another comment I found said, tiny seeds and seedlings don't necessarily want to be swimming in huge amounts of soil. It's easier to overwater, and their roots might struggle to develop. They do like to be hugged just a little. How does the seedling know the size of the pot? If seeds would not grow in a large amount of soil, what about the vegetable seeds you sow directly in the field? They seem to grow just fine. Here's another comment I found. Moving from a seedling start mix into richer soil is a great growth encouraging step, one we'd miss out if we started in big pots. This is not true since the seedless soil we mix has no nutrients and we fertilize to provide those nutrients. Another common reason to stay with smaller pots, if you put a very small plant into a large pot filled with potting medium, most of the medium will not be occupied by anything but bacteria and other life forms, some of which may not be desirable. Well, that's sort of true. Some of these microbes might not be desirable, but most of the microbes in soil are beneficial. We should be encouraging them. If you put a small plant in a big pot, you won't get much top growth because the plant is making lots of roots. This is simply not true. Plants grow both the top and roots at about the same time. They need leaves to make the food that roots need to grow. The reasons gardeners give for not going to a larger pot don't really seem to make much sense. So let's see what the science says. If you want to see the actual articles, I have links for these on my blog post, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. The North Carolina Extension Gardener's Handbook has this to say: choosing larger containers is beneficial as they do not dry out as quickly and require less frequent watering. Well, that's the exact opposite of common gardening advice. A meta-study that looked at 65 other studies that analyzed the effects of pot size on growth found that on average, doubling the pot size increased plant growth by 43%. Many of the studies tested pot size along with fertilizer levels and/or water stress. Fertilizer and water are more important to growth and can to some extent compensate for small pots. The science is quite clear. Larger pots produce more growth because plants are growing in a healthier condition. Why are bigger pots better? Leaf and root growth is interdependent. The leaves produce the food that roots need to grow, and roots provide the water and nutrients leaves need. Within certain limits, one will not grow without the other. A small pot restricts root growth, which in turn reduces top growth. A big myth is that potting media stays too wet and plant roots will rot. This isn't true unless you water too often. If you water and then leave the pot alone until it needs to be watered again, the pot won't be too wet. So which pot size is the best one? Well, it depends. A larger pot size will grow a larger plant. So if your goal is to grow large plants, go with the largest pot that you can accommodate. On the other hand, if your house plant is already quite large and you're trying to keep it smaller, then go with a smaller pot. That will control growth more than a large pot. If you're the type of person who waters all the time and kills your plants with too much water, then stick with the small pot. Large pots will be too wet if you water all the time. There is limited space under lights and on windowsills. Using small pots to grow spring seedlings might be the only way to accommodate all the seedlings you're trying to grow. But bigger pots are better for seedlings. Now that you understand the relationship between pot size and plant growth, you can make an intelligent decision about which pot size to use. Match it to your goals and your plant. Stop listening to all that common advice on the internet. A lot of it is wrong. Now, if you're sitting there wondering, well, how should I be watering my plants? You need to watch this video right here. Happy potting.